On my Latin 1 class many years ago in high school, I remember how our teacher, Father Miles Parsons, had a favorite saying. By the way, Father Miles, a Capuchin friar, lived here and served here at St. John's. He died here in 1998. But I remember Father Miles saying, he would say to the class, all good things come in threes. And so whether it was a list of vocabulary words or some Latin phrase, Father would have the class reciting aloud 3 times. All good things, he said, come in threes. And I thought of this classroom method or exercise as I reflected on today's gospel. Why? Because as we just heard, it was the 3rd appearance by Jesus to his disciples after having been raised from the dead. And I recall, as I'm sure you do, that it was just last Sunday when we read of the first 2 appearances. The first was when the disciples were locked behind closed doors, you remember? They were fearful, they were confused, and Jesus appears in their midst, coming through the locked doors, and says to them, "Peace be with you." And it was at that first appearance that he shared with them the power of the Holy Spirit. And then it was just a week later for the second appearance. Again, they are behind closed doors. Jesus appears, and we hear St. Thomas's profession of faith, "My Lord and my God." And here it is, the 3rd time he appears. But they are not locked behind closed doors, are they? They are out on the lake. They are fishing. And as we heard, they weren't doing very well. But their luck is going to change, because they look towards the shore, and what do they see? They see a man standing there. And this man calls out to them, almost saying, "You're doing it all wrong. Cast your net to the right side of the boat, and you will catch something." We can imagine that they looked at him. They weren't sure yet as to who he was. They looked at him and must have said, "What does he know?" But they listened to him. They listened, and we know what happened. My brothers and sisters, we can't help, I hope, to be impressed, to be moved by what happened at the lake that early morning. And may I suggest that we put ourselves there, along with Peter and the other disciples. Perhaps we can feel the rub of the sand under our feet. And perhaps we can sense and smell the aroma of the charcoal fire and the fish cooking on it. But more important than that, hopefully we can grasp the meaning of what Jesus is trying to do with his disciples and with us. This Jesus, who for 3 years, there's that third figure again, who for 3 years cured the sick, raised the dead, fed the thousands, that same Jesus is revealing his power once again. That Jesus, thought by many to be dead, buried, and by some hopefully forgotten, is very much alive and very much present. Without him, his followers are capable of little or nothing. No fish that night. But with him, what do we see? We see abundance. Abundance overflowing and to the breaking point. And so we have to be moved, whether it is ordinary wine that he changes into excellent water, into excellent wine, or empty nets filled to the breaking point, and more important than any of that, souls, needy souls, such as ours. When they respond to Jesus, when they do what the disciples did at the lake, they eventually come to recognize him. They search after him. They take great risks. Remember Peter jumping into the water? And they take the time to sit and break bread with Jesus. His power is felt. His power is revealed. And like it happens to the disciples that morning, it can happen to us. Because when we recognize him, when we go in search of him, and when we sit and break bread with him, what happens? The power of Jesus multiplies. It strengthens and it transforms. Empower all those who do this, all those who do it, to live the difficult life to which Jesus invites us, to which Jesus calls us. Because it is his power in us that makes us capable of living the Christian life with all that it demands of us. Still more is happening that morning on the lake. And every morning, when you and I encounter God, it is after breakfast, as we heard, when Jesus takes Peter aside for some rather solemn conversation. We have to remember that neither Peter nor Jesus can be expected to forget what happened between the two of them on the night before Jesus died. That night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, it seems that Jesus spoke to Peter without any effect. Peter seems to have forgotten that Jesus spoke and taught peace, non-violence, love of enemies. And you remember what Peter did that night. He put all of that aside and he picked up his sword and he attacks. That's contrary to what Jesus expects of his followers. And still later that night, you remember that Peter denies Jesus. He says he doesn't even know him. He rejects him 3 times. And now time has passed several weeks, and how to repair the damage done. Well, Jesus, as always, takes the initiative, and we see him, instead of opening up old, festering wounds, what does Jesus do? Jesus focuses on healing. Instead of Jesus returning to the past, what does he do? He focuses on the present moment. We notice, do we not, that he doesn't ask Peter, do you remember my teachings? Peter, are you ready to accept the lifestyle that I expect from my followers? He doesn't do any of that, does he? What does he do? Jesus seems to be concerned with one thing. Does Peter, do we truly love him? Because if we do, it covers a multitude of sins. If Peter, if we truly love our God, then everything else in our life, no matter how difficult, will fall into place. And it will be possible for us to do what he asks of us. All of the feeding, the tending, the serving, and the caring of one another. Even though it is difficult, it will be possible because of love. We must remember that on that morning, Jesus' job was finished. His task was over. The apprenticeship of his disciples ends, and they must now be commissioned to go out and take care, as he said, of the flock. They must protect it. They must be good shepherds to one another. Should any within that flock wander off, be neglected, or be abused, what must we do? We are expected to go out and to find one another and to carry one another in our arms and carry us home, where we will be respectfully and tenderly cared for. We are expected to give totally to one another, even our very lives. But all of this will happen only if we truly love God and love one another. And so, my brothers and sisters, again, let's put ourselves on the shoreline of the lake. Let's feel the surf come in and wash over our feet. And let us hear Jesus say to us, Salvatore, do you love me? Valerian, do you love me? Ingrid, do you love me? Giovanni, do you love me? Will you follow me? And when we hear this voice of Jesus, this question, what will our answer